This here is the pons. So this piece of the pons right here are pontine respiratory centers. So the pons is going to be involved. And then this down here, all of this is medulla. We've got ventral and dorsal, two different groups. This one in front is ventral. This is the ventral respiratory group. These are just nuclei, collections of cell bodies in the brain that have a certain function that we know about, and the dorsal respiratory group. These, you can see, ultimately are going to have output to, well, this makes sense, our intercostals. External intercostals and diaphragm are the inspiratory muscles. So this is constantly happening, right, just without thinking about it. Brainstem processes that are unconscious and happen when you're sleeping, right? So you are continuing to have those tidal volumes that are regulated by those intercostals and diaphragm muscles, and that's controlled by your medulla without you having to even think about it. The various different cell groups here, I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about. The medullary regions are more for setting like a basic rhythm. This dorsal group is going to have incoming information. So from baroreceptors and chemoreceptors. And the pontine group is, as you can see from this arrow, is going to influence down this way. So that within the brain connections, I'm not going to talk about much more than what I just did. You know about the brain regions that regulate ventilation, the medulla primarily, pons input as well. So we are going to look at what those centers need as stimuli, right? So altered PCO2, altered PO2, and pH are going to be detected by chemoreceptors. These chemoreceptors can be located centrally, so within the brainstem itself. These are central chemoreceptors in the medulla. Medullary chemoreceptors. Central means in the brain. There are also peripheral chemoreceptors in the aortic arch and the carotid body. Peripheral chemoreceptors, so in the periphery. There's going to be overlap of what these respond to. So we've got PCO2 and pH, and you know those things are related, right? As PCO2 increases, it's going to decrease pH. pH is primarily the thing detected in the medulla. This is inside the brain. The brain is very sensitive to changes in pH. So that's the quickest, 70% of our carbon dioxide response is from this mechanism. Peripheral chemoreceptors can also respond to both pH and PCO2. PO2, let's do this in a different color, is not as important a signal. So low PO2, which is kind of strange, right? But it's largely due to that pH effect. Detecting carbon dioxide quickly is more important than hypoxia. We'll come back to this a bit. So low PO2 is primarily detected by those peripheral chemoreceptors. So the sensor is going to be chemoreceptors, right? That's a receptor, a sensor are either here or here. Here is our sensor receptor. Our integrator is, regardless of where the sensor was, our integrator is going to be the medulla. The control region. So it may be that these receptors send a afferent signal, a neural signal to the medulla from the periphery. Regardless of how the information gets to the medulla is the integrator, makes that decision about whether to send an output signal via these nerves that travel to the diaphragm and intercostals here. So this as well, these red nerves here, they also innervate the accessory muscles. So if needed to take a larger inhalation, these are the actual red things here are the output signal. Then the things like any muscle that we're going to contact, external intercostals and diaphragm are the primary, right, targets or effector. We're going to have altered ventilation rate to exchange gas more quickly again. So it's a negative feedback loop. What are we maintaining? PCO2, PO2, and pH. And again, this is going to be the first and biggest one. Here's another diagram, similar process, similar thing shown here. This is just looking at, in this diagram, PCO2. Again, I told you that's the thing that our bodies respond to first, before PO2. So I had that before. Changes in PCO2 regulate ventilation before PO2. Two different mechanisms for this. This is our central, this is our peripheral. Our central is primarily through pH that's able to go into the extracellular fluid of the brain. This is about 70% of our response to changes in CO2 is high hydrogen, low pH, right? High PCO2 it equals high hydrogen, which is low pH. Peripheral chemoreceptors in the carotid body and aortic bodies, aortic arch, aortic bodies within the aortic arch mediate about 30%. So still important. This is the afferent impulse or input signal to the medulla, respiratory centers of the medulla. They're then going to have efferent impulses. These are somatic motor neurons that are going to innervate these skeletal muscles. High PCO2 would result in increased ventilation, which means more CO2 being inhaled. That's going to bring us back to homeostasis in terms of lower PCO2 and higher pH. So we've got here negative feedback. This high PCO2, this is called hypercapnia. Hypocapnia is low PCO2. Then oxygen, so if we did have low PO2, that could also be detected by these as well and initiate the same response, increased ventilation due to low PO2. So remember, I talked about chemoreceptors when we talked about blood pressure. So we're going to put together the same stimulus. Our stimulus is going to be either high PCO2, low pH, or low PO2. Those three things go together. So we've got a stimulus that's going to be detected by chemoreceptors. These chemoreceptors could be located in the aortic arch, carotid body, or medulla oblongata, central or peripheral. Either way, this signal is going to be transmitted to the medulla oblongata. Where in the medulla? Well, our respiratory center, and cardio-acceleratory center, and our vasomotor center. Okay, the result of targeting the respiratory center, so this is our integrator. Then we'll have targets and we'll have effects. Now I'm going to do these in different colors just to keep things straight. First, we'll do respiration. Respiratory centers of the medulla oblongata target our, let's just put respiratory muscles, diaphragm, and external intercostals, others if needed. That's going to result in increased ventilation. That's helping us respond to these things. Get rid of carbon dioxide, bring in more oxygen. Awesome. But I bet you already know what else, right? Cardio-acceleratory. This is going to target our heart muscle. Vasomotor. This is going to target our blood vessels, the arterioles primarily. So we've got increased cardiac output via heart rate and contractility. And we've got increased resistance, increased vasoconstriction, total peripheral resistance. Vasoconstriction is happening. So this allows our body to respond in multiple ways to the same stimulus.